Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give folks a few more minutes to join and then we'll get started. All right, we see a few more folks are logging on and then we'll get started exactly at 3 p.m. Eastern. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cultivating Oral Language and Literacy Talent in Students Research webinar. I'm Patricia Garcia from AIR, American Institutes of Research, and I'm here today with Rebecca Berge, a colleague of mine from AIR as well, and we're happy to be here with you today. So once again, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We know that your time is very valuable and we appreciate you spending some time with us to hear about a topic that is relevant, critical for supporting early learning, and one that's close to our hearts. Today, we are excited to share with you a curriculum called CULTS, Cultivating Oral Language Talent in Students, that can be used to support preschool dual language learners' language and literacy. We will begin our discussion with a brief introduction of the context of dual language learners today, followed by an overview of the components of the curriculum and as well as key practices within the program. And then we will share research study findings about our project. Before we get started, let's go through some logistical aspects of this webinar. If you have any technical issues with the webinar, please write those in the chat on the right column of your screen. You'll see a section that says chat, and that's where you want to put any technical issues, and our colleague Marianne is on the line to help you with any issues that you may have. Hopefully you won't have any, fingers crossed, but sometimes it happens, but we're here to help you. So just hang with us and we'll help you out. And if you have any questions or comments about the content, let's include those in the question section. That way we'll be monitoring the question section so we're able to answer your questions during the Q&A session later in the broadcast. Please feel free to write your questions throughout the webinar, and again, we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So let's practice by writing our name and where we're coming from or calling in today in the chat section, so we learn a little bit about all of you. Don't be shy, folks. Let me know where you're calling in from. All right, it might be that attendees don't have a chat section and people are writing in it in the question box, which is perfect. So so we have folks from all over. Virginia, we have quite a few. We have California. I'm calling in from Chicago today. We have Maryland. We have Washington State. This is great. All right, we have some folk, and Marianne's on top of some of the technical difficulties. We've been there, hang in there. Anna, we're going to make sure you can hear us soon. And this is going to be recorded, so don't worry. You'll be able to listen in on the webinar at any point. Okay, so welcome to all of you, and let's get started. So we want to tell you a little bit more about us. So it's great to have you all here today from all over the country. I'm Patricia Garcia Arena, a principal researcher at AIR. I've been at AIR for a little bit over 7 years now, and I have over 15 years of experience in the field of education research and technical assistance. I am a native Spanish speaker, so I remember very vividly being in preschool and learning another language and not quite understanding what my peers and teachers were saying. So I can't imagine what cults would have been like if it was around in the late 1970s. Not to date myself here, but so this is a topic really close to my heart. My research experience and interests have always included such topics as child development, literacy, language socialization, and educational attainment of minority students. And what I love about working at a place like AIR and working at like projects like cults is that you take the research knowledge about education and put it to technical assistance initiatives to support bilingual children. So, and for today's session, I have the pleasure of facilitating the discussion with my colleague, Rebecca Berge. Rebecca is a senior researcher at AIR, where her primary responsibilities include designing curriculum, facilitating professional development, and conducting research and that supports the education of English learners and dual language learners. She was formerly a national board certified teacher of English learners, especially enjoys working where she can support students and teachers. She's contributed to the development of the CULTS curriculum and was a project lead for the research study, which we will hear more about today. So we're lucky to have Rebecca here with us today to have a discussion on the CULTS curriculum and really have an interesting dialogue about how this impacts the field. So this is going to be a little bit different than your typical webinar. We're going to have a series of questions and answers that Rebecca will share some key features of cults and research study of cults to provide the context of why this work is important and give you key takeaways for the field. And we're going to be conducting this presentation through a dialogue through the two of us. All right. So we're going to start today with a poll. So we've learned a little bit about where some people listening today are calling in from, which is great. And now what we want to do is know a little bit more about what brought you here today. So what is your role? So we're going to launch a poll, and we'd like you to take some time, a couple of seconds, just to tell us what your primary professional goal is. And it's not here. Let's see. There we go. Collecting some responses. Almost 3/4 of you have answered the poll. Let's try to get 80% participation. Let's try. We're almost there. All right, we hit just over 80%. So um, I'll take it. So in our list in our participants today, we have a little over a third are early childhood educators and or care providers themselves. Great. We have about 16% early childhood administrators, almost 40% advocates, and 30% researchers. And we have a small percentage of policymakers as well. So everybody is represented in some way in the audience today. And thank you again for joining us. And we really think each of you, from your different perspectives, will find something um, useful and interesting in our presentation today about cults. So thank you for um, for answering our poll. So before we jump into um, the cults research and components as well, we want to tell you a little bit more about AIR. Now that we know a little bit more about you, we want to just take a few minutes to tell you about our work. The core of AIR's work supporting English learners is done through the Center for English Learners at AIR. We all know that English learners face the challenge of acquiring content knowledge in English at the same time that they're acquiring English as an additional language. AIR staff are supporting English learners by conducting rigorous research and evaluation to improve instruction and learning. They're also evaluating policy to inform decision making and enhancing English learner practice at the district, school, and classroom levels. And I encourage you all, when you have a chance, to please check out our website, the link shown here, to know a little bit more about our work. And don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. The work that we're going to be sharing to you today about the research study behind cults it was a project funded by AIR as one of a number of other projects focused on early childhood health and child welfare and education. AIR has a mission around equity in education, health, and other social science services. So this area of education where AIR funded the CULTS project, they also funded early language home visiting study and an early learning math study. So this study is part of AIR's equity work um, that we had the privilege of working under. Now that you know a little bit more about us, we're gonna dive right back into cults and give you some details. It's important before we talk about the curriculum, though, to give you a little bit of background on dual language learners. So it's important to understand why the early years are so important in supporting dual language learners' language and literacy skills. Because across the US, 1/3 of young children are what you call young dual language learners. They're defined as children birth to age 5 who are learning in another language in addition to English. And they represent one of the fastest growing populations in the United States. Currently, only 7 states have policies mandating that early childhood education staff have training or qualifications for working with dual language learners. And many early childhood teachers report a need for more training related to dual language learners. So a curriculum like CULTS can be a very valuable resource for early childhood educators serving DLLs today. Research from the recent National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics report on dual language learners suggests the following. There are many research supports of the benefits of bilingualism, such as the birth to age 5 is an essential time for language development. Young DLLs have the capacity to learn more than one language. Language development is different for DLLs compared to monolinguals, and they benefit from targeted and specific language support. Bilingualism has cognitive, social, cultural, and academic benefits for children. And last but not least, DLLs benefit most when they have strong foundation in their home language and quality and quantity of language interactions with competent speakers shape language development. So that is why it's so important to foster a child's bilingual language development. All right, so this is the part that you've all been waiting for. We're going to turn our attention to CULTs. Cultivating oral language and literacy talent in students. This is an early language and literacy curriculum for preschool students. Today we're going to hear and learn about CULTs. So Rebecca, as our first question, can you tell us in a few words what CULTs is and how it supports young DLLs?
Sure. Thanks, Patricia, for that context on, why we are working on a program specifically for this population of early childhood dual language learners. So what CULTS is a research-based program that's designed specifically for preschool children, especially dual language learners. CULTS, it was developed iteratively over the past few years, and it was largely based on this research which you mentioned about practices that guide DLLs and best practices for them. One important body of work that we drew from was the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides. So the practices mentioned in those that have a research base we were using and building into the CULTS curriculum. So what does CULTS include? Well, it has activities that will build foundational literacy, develop students' oral language, build topic or content knowledge, as well as conceptual knowledge. And it's building that language. It has the potential to build that language and content in both English and Spanish, which we'll hear about. So there's a version of the curriculum in English, and then there's a matching set in Spanish, so that it can be adapted and used in a variety of language model approaches.
Great.
So taking a look at what's included with CULTS, it consists of 6 units in English as well as 6 units in Spanish. Each unit is comprised of 5 lessons that are centered around a children's book. These books that we chose are selected for their literary and informational quality, the text type, as well as their appeal to young children. And then that the content aligns with early learning outcomes such as those in the Head Start Early Learning Outcomes framework. You can see here the titles that we have that are across both informational and narrative text, and here they're listed in English. And as well as on our next slide, we can see that we have the Spanish component of those books as well. So that students or programs could use, depending upon their setting and interest, they could use just the English, they could use the English and Spanish pieces of each brought together. It has that flexibility and is offering support for both languages.
Sorry, Rebecca. Talking about technical difficulties. There we go. So my next question is, I'm sure a lot of our learners would like to hear more about the practices that are used in CULTS. So can you tell us about the key practices for supporting young dual language learners and how those can be implemented?
Sure. So let's start with just a high-level summary of what is included, and then we'll dive in and see some examples of each of those practices. So as I mentioned, each unit is centered around a story. And so in order to go through the lessons of that story, we have a very clear teacher guide of what teachers can be doing with the book reading as well as the other lessons and practices, and goes through and explains how to implement those. And we also have a number of vocabulary cards. And these vocabularies help to develop students' language before, during, and after reading using these picture cards, which you can see here. The teacher guide also goes through this process of the activities that can take place during pre-reading and interactive book reading, as well as post-reading, and some suggestions for even extension activities that could be done during center time or other activities in the day. In addition to each unit, we also have a writing handout. So the last lesson in each unit, lesson 5, is focused on writing. And then we also have take-home activities for family engagement. The bilingual family literacy activities offer parents and caregivers some opportunities to support the learning with activities in the household or going places in the community together, encourages them to talk about their experiences, and then document them by drawing pictures, logging their activity, and writing about it. So encouraging them to talk and write and continue to read about the theme that is presented in that unit. And these take-home materials then can be sent home with each child and family, offered in English and Spanish as well.
Rebecca?
So,
Yeah. Sorry. You good? Okay.
So looking at this in practice, how are these built out together? So in each lesson, teachers will engage in pre-reading activities. So looking at the key vocabulary for the day, as well as interactive activities. So the vocabulary is then presented during the context of the story. Questions are used to support understanding and comprehension of the content of the story, and then post-reading activities. So to begin to connect the content of the book and do additional practice with the language and the vocabulary, and done through games or other activities. So that's a high-level overview. We can dive in more to some of these practices now.
Thanks. Giving us a good idea what that should look like is really helpful. So we're gonna.
Yeah, we got the sequence, the scope of how this all lays out. So.
So it was really great to hear the high level perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about how vocabulary can be taught over time during the course of the unit? And can you describe some of the practices used to support vocabulary learning using multiple modalities?
Sure, that's a great question. You know, it's we provide through cults. We know that children should be hearing words in multiple ways, interacting with words in multiple ways, and hearing them across time through, both reading, oral language, play activities. So we've built that in so that teachers have an idea of how this can happen across the unit. So the first thing we want to think about, though, is the type of words that we're choosing for students to focus on. Here in this picture, you'll see an example of what we call keywords. And keywords are words that are important for understanding the meaning of the story, but they're also words that we'll hear that are connected. They're able to be used across multiple settings. They're going to hear them in, beyond just this story. They're going to be important for understanding of conceptual topics, as well as used throughout student language opportunities. So we choose to teach keywords by pre-teaching using these vocabulary cards. And on one side, we have the word in English and Spanish and a picture that helps to give an image of what the word is for the children. On the other side, we have a list of activities that the teacher can go through. So they would include things such as a child-friendly definition, a translation of the word, children going through and repeating the word together, making a connection to something in the children's lives so that they incorporate and integrate what the meaning of this is, and then some, physical response activities, acting out, pretend play, doing something to practice integrating using this word. So you can see giving the children those multiple modalities of what is this word in a variety of contexts, thinking about it in a variety of ways. The keywords, because they're drawn from the books themselves, they're also mentioned and reinforced then during the reading time. And then again, in post-reading, we do some activities around identifying the keyword in a series of pictures, or looking at examples and non-examples of the word. So just that continued practice of, we're not just seeing this word one time and trying to understand it there, but we're seeing it a variety of times throughout the day, throughout the lesson, seeing how it's used within the actual book, not taken out of context, but use it within the book, connecting it to their lives, using it in just, that continuous reinforcement of the word in a variety of ways and over time.
Great.
So another example too, we also have topic words. So if you think about keywords, those are the words that you need for not just this book, but for a variety of settings, a variety of content areas. The topic words are really more focused on the content and the topic of the book. So in this case, we have a book that dives into occupations or jobs, and so the topic words that children will be going through have to do with specific job examples. And these words are thematically um, organized, or they're around the specific themes of the book. So these words, we again go through some of the those multiple modes of activity to practice it, and a script on the back for the teachers to follow. So including again the child-friendly definition, the translation, some kinesthetic activities, and then also just because these are thematically tied together, we talk about what this group of words means, and do some interactive practice activities and play type things built around the themed words.
Okay, so what does interactive reading look like? Research with both monolingual and dual language speakers constantly indicates that interactive shared reading has a positive impact on oral language outcomes. Can you tell us what book reading looks like?
Sure. So as you can see, sort of the two cornerstones of CULTS are really, this emphasis on vocabulary and doing it across multiple days and multiple modes. And also the book reading is something that, we're very intentional about, and including the types of practices that we know will support students. So what is interactive reading? It's not just the teacher, reading the book to the children, but it's read aloud along with questions and other strategies so that they're modeling reading, they're engaging the children, they're providing scaffolds for both language as well as comprehension of the story and the content. Um, so this interactive reading, it takes place in lessons 1 through 4. We're reading different sections of the book, and it begins with things like in the beginning, some pre-reading or introduction about what the book is about, doing a picture walk of the book, and in each lesson going back and summarizing, what we read about in a prior section of the book. Then during the book reading, teachers use questions in the curriculum that are built in to support children's language development, to foster their comprehension around the text, and to develop conceptual knowledge. And then at the end, they'll do a read aloud closure question. So that asks students, either summarize what they heard about, make some inferences about the text, or predictions about what will happen next. So being very intentional about what types of practices happen during that book reading, so that children are exposed to the type of literacy and language practices that will help to develop them. And as you can see in this example here, we're offering guided questions. So it gives on the left-hand column is, explaining to the teacher what pages exactly they're reading, giving some guidance. The center part is the script for the teacher. So reading through what they say, as they read it, some particular things to focus on and how they build out. So in this one, for example, they're talking about the occupation words, and they're doing some chanting and some acting out to reinforce understanding of those words during the reading. You'll also see some anticipated responses on the right-hand column. So ideas of, how students or children may respond. And in cases where it's, comprehension, it may give examples of like a one-word response, as well as a longer one. So you can see and ideas of, if children respond with that one word, how could you rephrase it and provide them a larger answer and help continue to build up their language that they're hearing and in talking about the text.
So Rebecca, this would be really helpful for a teacher. Like we were saying, a lot of teachers of dual language learners don't feel that they're getting professional development or training. This type of script might help them feel a little bit more confident in how to support these students, right?
Exactly, that's the idea. And in the cults and the curriculum that we have, it's all mapped out here in the stories for teachers to go to read and to understand. So it's a really great model and example. And the idea is after doing, 6 units of this in English or 6 in English and 6 in Spanish, teachers begin to embody these practices and see the types of questions that they can be asking, the ways they can involve children in the book reading activities. So it's building out
That's
those
great.
habits and routines so that teachers are able to continue these practices.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just interactive reading, right? You mentioned that writing is also a part of cults,
Mhm.
and we don't often think about writing during preschool, right? So can you describe what that looks like?
Yeah, I know writing always comes as a question of, are preschoolers really writing? What does that mean? And like all things, the reading activities and the language, we're really setting the building blocks in the preschool in the early years. And so that's what we are doing here. We're modeling for them what writing looks like, our writing process, and helping them wherever they are. So lesson 5 is we read the book completely to the children, and then we do a writing prompt, and that's done through an experience approach. So we read the prompt and we talk about it, and then the teacher will model for them for the children. Okay, this is how I would respond to the prompt. I'm going to draw a picture to tell you about my response, and then I'm going to write. I'm going to tell you a sentence, and I'm going to show you how I write that. So children are beginning to see a good model of the writing process. And then they're invited to participate themselves. So there's a writing handout, and they will, start by drawing a picture to respond to what the writing prompt is. And then as children are able, if they can have one word from their word wall that they want to include and copy, that could be a start. If they just want to talk about it orally, then the teacher comes around, and as they hear students give response orally, then the teacher or teacher assistant takes the time to write out the student's response. So they see, where their idea goes from being an oral language into the print. So setting that
Yeah.
building block and foundation for writing, but having them see that process and really take ownership of it. Those of you who are out in the field, as you've seen, if children begin to put anything in writing, they take such pride in it. And that's what we're starting to build, is that they feel like writers. And, you can enter it at any of these stages of wherever they're at. If it's some scribbles, if it's one word that they copy, if it's some initial pieces, wherever they're at, just celebrating that and helping to build the process and the foundation for the writing.
And starting to make that connection between oral language and written language is so important, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. So, um, in these times of COVID that we're living in, we've become even more aware of the importance of family engagement for student learning. How does CULTS address family learning activities? What if a family doesn't speak English at home? How would CULTS help?
Sure. So as I mentioned in the beginning, each unit also contains some family literacy materials that children take home and use with their family members. So this is to continue building the language and the content knowledge, and they can choose to do that in their home language or in English, depending upon. We encourage, educators and programs to speak to families about the importance of their home language, but encourage them to use whatever language they are most confident and comfortable in to do these activities with their children. And so when we talk about, if they make a choice of their home language, that's where they're comfortable in. We talk about the ways that building up this content, building up the language and literacy skills in their home language can then transfer to supporting English language development. So that's what we're doing here, is we're being intentional about having the simultaneous practice of in the classroom, going through the activities, the content, the language, but continuing to build that at home through these activities, making them things that they can do, through everyday activities, not making it homework at all, but making it songs, some games that they do, going out in the community, making it personal for them so that it's something that they're building their own set of language around this. And then again, just building it into the reading and writing process. So it's not, and connecting it to the oral language. So it's not just, talk about this with your family, but talk about it and then draw the picture, build, write out some of your ideas, see how children, again, connect that oral language to the written language, and see how you build out those, those writing skills. So connecting, just continuously connecting the process of oral language, reading and writing around the content.
Great. And as someone who's tested out, done some of these activities at home, it is really engaging and the the children really get into it. But with that in mind, we did a study, right? So let's turn our attention to our pilot study findings and see what the field had to say about cults. So can you start, Rebecca, by telling me about the goals and research questions motivating the study and how you conducted it?
Yeah, of course. So as we mentioned in the beginning, the practices in the cults were developed out of some research that we know is important for English learners. And so we were really seeing, how these practices are useful for early childhood dual language learners. And then so through the study, we wanted to see, how is cults working for teachers and families? How are they using it? And what are we seeing as a result of using that? So these were really the guiding questions. We wanted to see how this would work in practice and what kind of outcomes we would see for families and children. So to talk a little bit about our study, our sample included participants were 60 children, and we had them in 12 treatment classrooms, as well as 58 children in 10 control classrooms. So we were looking at children who were 3 years old at the start of the school year, and who are dual language learners, speaking English and Spanish, with sort of variation in their English or Spanish. And we had classrooms, some that were using the English curriculum because that was their primary language of instruction that they reported to us for the class, as well as some that used the smaller set who used the Spanish set of materials because that's what they reported as being the primary language of instruction for their classroom. And these took place within Head Start agencies in a southern US state. So we wanted to, do it in the population that we were really designing this for, classrooms comprised of, dual language learners and a high percentage of dual language learners that could really benefit from a program like this.
Okay.
So the measures that we used to answer our research questions, we had a curriculum-based measure of vocabulary, standardized vocabulary, and sentence structure. A really interesting one we did, and which we'll talk about the findings from in a minute, some language analysis of their oral language retelling. So if you're not familiar with SALT, it's an assessment where students go through a picture book, and the assessor kind of tells them the story, asks them some questions along the way, and then at the end ask them to retell the story. And then you go through and you analyze the language that students are producing in that retelling of the story. So you get a sense of, you're able to look at what kind of language do students use. And then we also had teacher and parent logs. We wanted to see how they were implementing it, any sort of feedback they had on it. And we did observations of both treatment and control classrooms, a teacher pre and post survey, and a family pre and post survey. So we just, we wanted to get a full picture of how implementation was going and how teachers' experience were with it, parents' experience, and children's experience.
Great. Can you tell us about the extent to which teachers and families implemented the curriculum?
Yeah, so we did see a high level of implementation fidelity from the teachers. So, we went through 2 days of training as well as some coaching throughout for the teachers. And we were noticing that, using the materials, seeing the script, they were able to implement it to a high degree of fidelity. Parents who reported using the activities, almost all indicated that they really enjoyed the activities, that it was something that, they were able to do and that they were enjoying with their family.
Great.
So always great to hear that this is something, the way you design it and intend it to be used is
Yeah.
that it's going that way.
And what did you find for children who participated in the cults curriculum?
Yeah, so one of the really interesting things that we found was that the children who participated in the CULTS classrooms showed some significantly larger gains in their oral language proficiency than children who were in the control classroom, who had heard the same books read aloud, but were not using the CULTS materials or had the professional development for CULTS. And this finding comes from what I mentioned, the recorded samples of student oral language that were analyzed using SALT methods. So we saw that children who had experienced the CULTS curriculum, they improved both the amount and the variety of language that they were using for this story retell task.
Great. And I see here that people can read more about the cult study. We have a link on the presentation, but we'll be sending out the article to folks who are listening to the webinar today. So you'll have that handy to read all the research study details.
Mhm.
All right. Oops, sorry. So there's the link to our research study.
Okay. Yeah. And so just a quick summary of the takeaways from this. So we saw that, when we do focus on this vocabulary and these engaging book routines, that it can lead to positive findings for children's oral language. So the volume and the quality of language that they're producing. And we know that oral language is an important indicator of later literacy development for students. So, this idea that through these activities, we can improve upon the type of language that they're using, their oral language, really develop that out, that this shows some promise for the types of practices that we would like to see, in place for dual language learners, and how we can really build up their language and leverage their language development to the best and develop out their bilingualism. Another
Yeah.
important thing is that this study was with a younger group. They were 3-year-olds. So there's less, although there's more on the preschool age students, there's less research about younger children and whether these types of practices even work for them, what types of things are important. And so it was exciting to see that, with the 3-year-old, this younger population, you can begin to see some change based on implementing practices that are intentional for their language and literacy development.
And Rebecca, that really makes sense to me because we know that language development is shaped by quantity and quality of language input that children receive. So when providers focus on developing language through models of key vocabulary and strategies to engage and interact with them during book reading and other writing activities, or family is involved in activities at home, they're providing a rich and varied language model for their children. And children are not only listening to language, but they're receiving scaffolded supports to engage and interact with that language. So, which is extremely beneficial at such a young age, right? They're sponges for language. So, as we mentioned in the beginning, the early years are so important in developing bilingualism and high quality early learning experiences that have potential to build a strong language and literacy foundation for these young DLLs' future academic success. And it's just great to see research that put into practice by providing preschool educators tools and supports for implementing these practices in a structured and an intentional way. And in the end, the DLLs are getting the adequate support that they need to reap those benefits that we mentioned in the beginning of the presentation about cognitive, social, and academic benefits of bilingualism. So thanks. This is great. So we wanted to round out today's session by responding to a few questions from the audience. We've been watching the questions coming through around a few common themes. So we want to take a few minutes here to address some of these key areas. And we want to reassure you that if your questions are not answered today, we will follow up through email to provide more information. So if you do have a question that comes to you, please do not hesitate to put it in the question area of the platform. So let's see here. One of the themes coming, Rebecca, is about settings.
Mhm.
What settings can cults be implemented in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know early childhood programs take a variety of models, approaches, and especially with regard to, the way they handle language, that there's a variety of options out there that some settings are, English, the instruction is in English because the class has a variety of languages of the students. Some have, the lead teacher is primarily in English, but has support of the home language from a teacher assistant or, another co-teacher. We also have settings where there is a dual language approach, an intentional, maybe the morning in one language, the afternoon in another. So cults can really fit into any of these program models or approaches. So we do, like I mentioned, we have the English version. So if you're one of those classes that has, a multiple languages, really linguistically diverse background of students, then you would draw from the English resources that really provide all of the scaffolds that a teacher who themselves is monolingual can enact and provide, the linguistic support for all students. Those are great for, just building up language development and literacy practices. In the settings where they do have staff who can support Spanish as the home language, they can use either depending upon their program model, could use the entire Spanish curriculum as the guide. They could use, some combination of, if they're a 50-50 model, they may want to do, the English version as well alongside the Spanish version. Or like I said, I know probably the most common is there's a lot of programs that are in the middle that they primarily conducted in English, but they have a lot of home language support and trying to find ways to build in that home language support. And this would be really useful in those cases as well, because you can take the pieces and use the language of the Spanish language support in very intentional ways. So you could take, for example, the keywords and vocabulary and help do small group targeted sessions with a group of students who have Spanish as their primary home language, and work through the vocabulary with them, help build up some understanding of the content in that using that home language support. Or you could, take the book reading, do the book reading, as have them listen to it in Spanish first, so they've heard the storyline, they understand it. Then when they hear it later in English, they're able to do that. So, it's flexible. It can build into these different approaches and models that are there. And
That's
as I
great.
mentioned, these practices are things that the book reading, the vocabulary, that are just great practices for students of this age. So if you have other curriculum or, doing something already, it could be build and kind of build out what's already taking place. And just for a point of reference, the unit, there are 5 lessons, and each lesson we say takes around 15 to 20 minutes. So we know that, these are young kids, they're active. You're not going to hold their attention very
Mhm.
long. So we intend them to be able to, be implemented in short pieces. And, sort of the ideas that happens across, a time span of a variety of days. However, again, depending upon the program, their model and approach, it could be implemented in different ways. So it could be, built into a circle time. It could be, one piece is in circle time, others are in center time. So lots of flexibility, and we wanted to acknowledge that programs have their own approach, their own ways of doing things, and give them resources that work within their approach.
It's great to hear how versatile and just flexible it is for teachers to use it up how they see fit to support their students. It's great. Um, can you implement cults in a virtual setting? This is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I think this is something we have all been thinking a lot about lately, Patricia, right?
Yeah.
It's a great question. And, there's these practices, the research that we've drawn from to create cults, as well as the study that we, just spoke about, and the study findings are all based on doing this in person. So we know that, that's where the research is, but we're faced with a new reality of saying, if we have to do things virtually, what can we do? So we've created a supplemental guide that it includes some considerations for adapting to a virtual environment, and what are things that, for example, could be done synchronous versus asynchronous, and just thinking about the nature of these practices and how much and when are the points that engagement and interaction are important. So we know that's a really important piece, and any opportunity that we have for um, for teachers to be able to interact with language with students, and to do, if that has to happen in a virtual setting, what are the points, like the interactive book reading, for example, because you want students engaging with you, providing responses, building off of their responses. That's something that whenever possible, you would want to be doing in real time. Whereas something like the vocabulary practice, the vocabulary cards, if you had to make a choice, you would say that's something that perhaps I could create a video of, create some activities around that children can then watch and or implement with their families on their own time. So, obviously we're all in the same boat of trying to figure out what's best in the virtual environment and learning as we go. But we definitely, we've been thoughtful about some considerations of based on these practices and what we know are sort of the essential um, factors in implementing those practices that we need to use.
So again, being flexible, right? Making it work
Yeah.
for the students. You talked a little bit about the family piece of cults. Listeners would like to hear more about how cult supports families.
Yeah, and I mean, what a great follow-up to the question about virtual learning, because as we enter into the virtual learning arena, what we see is more and more importance placed on the role of the families and how they are taking a primary role in children's learning. So as we mentioned, Colts does have these supplementary activities that are already created with the intention of supporting language practices in the home. And we offer these in both English and Spanish. And so the piece here is that we want to make sure that these aren't just sent home or they're just not given to families, but they're contextualized with messaging about the home language and letting families know that, doing these activities, using language, engaging in literacy experiences in the home language are really going to benefit them. And these are things that they can be doing at home right now with their children that will have benefits for them later as they transfer them to their English language and literacy development. So providing them some tools and resources and ideas for how to build up those language and literacy activities in the home is what we are hoping those activities are. They're not just like an add-on or something to give, but they're about building these practices and supporting the idea of home language use and how it can develop bilingualism and in fact, transfer to helping develop English.
No, thank you
So,
so.
we want to just
Yeah,
continue that
yeah.
these partnerships, and hopefully in the end of this, the communication among families and the building up of the home language is something that could be a silver lining in this all. That positive experiences and interactions grow out of this.
So true. That's the ultimate goal, right? So thank you so much. I know the issues of virtual learning and family engagement and the many contexts that children are learning in today have all been on the forefront for a lot of us in the early childhood field, especially in 2020. So it's great to hear how cults fits in within this current context. And I know that if you were here with us today, since you're here with us today, you are showing your commitment to ensuring high quality learning experiences for DLs, all our learners here today in their different roles in early childhood and care. And I know that this investment in the early years is so critical for future academic success of young dual language learners. And so I can't believe that our time is slowly coming to a close here, but we want to thank you all in the audience today for joining us and sharing so we could share what we've learned as we embark on this work together. And we want to take this opportunity to thank you for all that you do for young dual language learners. Your work is so important and we really appreciate your investment. I want to share a little bit more information with you here. Here are some of the references you'll see throughout the presentation today for those of you who are interested in that. Um, we also have our contact information. If you're interested in learning more about the practices and cults, please reach out for a follow-up conversation. We'd be happy to speak with you more about your particular context, interests, and needs. And we have just a few minutes left, and we want to ask you to take the remaining time to take a short survey that will appear on your screen when you exit the webinar. We really appreciate your feedback today, and we look forward to hearing from you, your comments about the webinar and about cults. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.